Article 518.1 of the National Electrical Code defines the scope of assembly occupancies. It covers buildings or portions of buildings designed for the gathering of 100 or more persons for purposes such as deliberation, worship, entertainment, eating, drinking, amusement, waiting transportation, or similar activities. A proposal suggests expanding this definition to explicitly include supermarkets and large chain hardware stores with a floor area of 10,000 square feet or more. The intent of this proposed amendment is to clarify that these types of retail spaces, due to their potential for high occupancy, should be subject to the safety requirements outlined in Article 518. This ensures consistent application of safety standards in locations where large numbers of people congregate. It is important to consider the implications of classifying supermarkets and large hardware stores as assembly occupancies. Firstly, understanding what assembly occupancies are. These are locations where a significant number of people gather for various purposes, from entertainment to religious services. The Code recognizes that these spaces require specific safety measures to protect occupants in the event of an emergency. Secondly, considering the rationale for the inclusion. Supermarkets and large hardware stores can easily accommodate 100 or more people at any given time. Their large open layouts and the nature of their business make them potential locations for large gatherings. Thirdly, evaluating the impact on electrical installations. The Code will impose specific requirements for electrical installations in assembly occupancies. These requirements might include enhanced emergency lighting, backup power systems, and specific wiring methods to minimize fire hazards. Fourthly, identifying the areas covered. The proposal specifies large chain hardware stores with a floor area of 10,000 square feet or more. This ensures that the classification applies to larger retail spaces where significant numbers of people are more likely to be present. Fifthly, maintaining consistency. The proposed amendment aims to ensure consistency in the application of safety standards. By explicitly including supermarkets and large hardware stores, the Code provides clear guidance to electrical contractors and inspectors. Sixthly, the impact on design considerations. Electrical engineers and contractors will need to consider the requirements of Article 518 when designing and installing electrical systems in these facilities. This could include additional safety measures and higher quality materials. Seventhly, the role of local jurisdictions. Local jurisdictions may have additional requirements or interpretations of the Code. It is important to consult with local authorities to ensure compliance with all applicable regulations. Eighthly, the benefits of the amendment. The proposed amendment will enhance the safety of occupants in supermarkets and large hardware stores by ensuring that electrical installations meet specific safety standards. Ninthly, the importance of public input. Public input is crucial in the Code development process. Stakeholders are encouraged to provide feedback on proposed amendments to ensure that the Code is practical and effective. Tenthly, the long-term implications. The proposed amendment could have long-term implications for the design, construction, and maintenance of electrical systems in supermarkets and large hardware stores. The proposed amendment would clarify that supermarkets and large chain hardware stores with a floor area of 10,000 square feet or more are considered assembly occupancies and therefore subject to the requirements of Article 518. This clarification is consistent with the intent of the Code, which is to ensure the safety of occupants in all buildings where large numbers of people gather. However, it is important to note that the proposed amendment would not require supermarkets and hardware stores to be classified as assembly occupancies for all purposes. For example, they would not be required to meet the requirements for egress lighting or emergency lighting that are specifically applicable to assembly occupancies. However, they would be subject to the general safety requirements of Article 518, such as the requirements for smoke and fire alarms, sprinkler systems, and fire-resistant construction. The proposed amendment is a reasonable and necessary clarification of the Code. It will help to ensure that supermarkets and hardware stores are designed and constructed in a way that protects the safety of occupants. Consider the practical implications of this amendment. Firstly, enhanced safety measures would be needed. Supermarkets and large hardware stores would need to implement additional safety measures to comply with Article 518, such as enhanced fire alarm systems and emergency lighting. Secondly, design considerations would change. Electrical engineers and contractors would need to consider the requirements of Article 518 when designing and installing electrical systems in these facilities, potentially increasing design complexity. Thirdly, increased construction costs are likely. The cost of constructing or renovating supermarkets and large hardware stores could increase due to the additional safety measures and higher quality materials required. Fourthly, inspection requirements would be stringent. Building inspectors would need to ensure that supermarkets and large hardware stores comply with the requirements of Article 518, leading to more rigorous inspections. Fifthly, training requirements would expand. Electrical contractors and inspectors would need to receive additional training on the requirements of Article 518 and how they apply to supermarkets and large hardware stores. Sixthly, maintenance requirements would change. Supermarkets and large hardware stores would need to implement more stringent maintenance programs to ensure that electrical systems and safety measures are properly maintained. Seventhly, potential legal liabilities could arise. Owners and operators of supermarkets and large hardware stores could face increased legal liabilities if they fail to comply with the requirements of Article 518 and someone is injured as a result. Eighthly, potential for increased insurance costs exist. Insurance companies could increase premiums for supermarkets and large hardware stores to reflect the increased risk associated with assembly occupancies. Ninthly, economic impact on retailers should be considered. The additional costs associated with compliance could have a negative impact on the profitability of supermarkets and large hardware stores, especially smaller businesses. Tenthly, ensuring public awareness is important. Public awareness campaigns could be launched to educate consumers about the safety measures in place at supermarkets and large hardware stores and what to do in the event of an emergency. The proposed amendment seeks to enhance safety. It is essential to consider its broader implications for retailers, electrical professionals, and the public. The National Electrical Code is a comprehensive set of standards that govern the safe installation of electrical wiring and equipment. It is updated every 3 years to reflect changes in technology and best practices. Article 518 specifically addresses assembly occupancies. Assembly occupancies are defined as buildings or portions of buildings designed or intended for the gathering together of 100 or more persons for purposes such as deliberation, worship, entertainment, eating, drinking, amusement, awaiting transportation, or similar purposes. These occupancies have unique electrical safety requirements due to the potential for large numbers of people to be present in a single location. Key considerations for electrical installations in assembly occupancies include emergency lighting. Adequate emergency lighting is crucial to ensure safe egress in the event of a power outage or other emergency. Backup power systems are also essential. Backup power systems, such as generators or uninterruptible power supplies or ups, can provide power to critical systems such as emergency lighting, fire alarms, and communication systems. Fire alarm systems are mandated. Fire alarm systems must be designed and installed to provide early warning of a fire, allowing occupants to evacuate safely. Wiring methods are specified. Wiring methods used in assembly occupancies must be selected to minimize the risk of fire and electrical shock. Overcurrent protection is also a must. Overcurrent protection devices, such as circuit breakers and fuses, must be properly sized and installed to protect electrical circuits from overload and short circuits. Grounding and bonding practices should be followed. Grounding and bonding are essential to minimize the risk of electrical shock and to provide a path for fault current to return to the source. Inspection and testing should be done. Electrical installations in assembly occupancies must be regularly inspected and tested to ensure that they are in good working order. Compliance with the National Electrical Code is essential for ensuring the safety of occupants in assembly occupancies. Electrical engineers, contractors, and inspectors must be knowledgeable of the requirements of Article 518 and other applicable codes and standards. The proposed amendment aims to clarify that supermarkets and large chain hardware stores with a floor area of 10,000 square feet or more are considered assembly occupancies and therefore subject to the requirements of Article 518. This clarification is consistent with the intent of the Code, which is to ensure the safety of occupants in all buildings where large numbers of people gather. The inclusion of supermarkets and large hardware stores as assembly occupancies would have several implications for electrical installations. Emergency lighting systems would need to be installed to provide adequate illumination in the event of a power outage. Backup power systems would need to be installed to provide power to critical systems such as emergency lighting, fire alarms, and communication systems. Fire alarm systems would need to be designed and installed to provide early warning of a fire. Wiring methods used in these occupancies would need to be selected to minimize the risk of fire and electrical shock. Overcurrent protection devices would need to be properly sized and installed to protect electrical circuits from overload and short circuits. Grounding and bonding would need to be properly installed to minimize the risk of electrical shock. Electrical installations would need to be regularly inspected and tested to ensure that they are in good working order. The proposed amendment would help to ensure that supermarkets and large hardware stores are designed and constructed in a way that protects the safety of occupants. It is a reasonable and necessary clarification of the Code. In evaluating this proposal, it's essential to consider several factors. Firstly, the occupancy load assessment should be done. Determine if supermarkets and large hardware stores typically have an occupancy load of 100 or more persons. Conduct surveys or consult with industry experts to gather data on occupancy levels during peak hours. Secondly, risk assessment would need to be done. Assess the potential risks to occupants in supermarkets and large hardware stores, such as fire hazards, electrical hazards, and evacuation challenges. Consider factors such as the presence of flammable materials, the complexity of the layout, and the availability of exits. Thirdly, cost-benefit analysis should be evaluated. Evaluate the costs and benefits of classifying supermarkets and large hardware stores as assembly occupancies. Consider the costs of implementing additional safety measures, such as emergency lighting, fire alarms, and sprinkler systems. Weigh these costs against the potential benefits of reducing the risk of injuries and fatalities. Fourthly, the consistency with other codes and standards needs to be checked. Ensure that the proposed amendment is consistent with other applicable codes and standards such as the International Building Code and the National Fire Protection Association standards. Fifthly, stakeholder input needs to be considered. Solicit input from stakeholders, including supermarket and hardware store owners, electrical contractors, building inspectors, and fire officials. Address any concerns or objections that are raised by stakeholders. Sixthly, the scope of the amendment needs to be clear. Clearly define the scope of the proposed amendment, specifying the types of supermarkets and large hardware stores that would be subject to the requirements of Article 518. Consider factors such as the size of the store, the number of employees, and the type of merchandise sold. Seventhly, the enforcement mechanisms should be checked. Develop enforcement mechanisms to ensure that supermarkets and large hardware stores comply with the requirements of Article 518. This could include regular inspections, fines for violations, and revocation of permits. Eighthly, the educational resources should be made available. Provide educational resources to help supermarket and hardware store owners, electrical contractors, and building inspectors understand the requirements of Article 518. This could include training courses, webinars, and online resources. Ninthly, the periodic review should be done. Periodically review the effectiveness of the proposed amendment and make adjustments as needed. Monitor the number of fires, injuries, and fatalities in supermarkets and large hardware stores to assess the impact of the amendment. Tenthly, documentation and record keeping should be maintained. Maintain accurate records of inspections, violations, and corrective actions. This information can be used to track compliance with the requirements of Article 518 and to identify areas where improvements are needed. By carefully considering these factors, you can develop a well-reasoned proposal that will enhance the safety of occupants in supermarkets and large hardware stores. The goal is to ensure the well-being of the public while minimizing the burden on businesses. The proposed amendment seeks to address a potential gap in the current code by explicitly including supermarkets and large chain hardware stores within the scope of Article 518. This article of the National Electrical Code focuses on assembly occupancies, which are defined as buildings or portions of buildings designed or intended for the gathering together of 100 or more persons for purposes such as deliberation, worship, entertainment, eating, drinking, amusement, waiting, transportation, or similar activities. The rationale behind this proposal is that supermarkets and large hardware stores, particularly during peak hours, often have a significant number of people present, making them similar to other assembly occupancies in terms of potential risk. By including these types of stores, the proposed amendment aims to ensure that they are subject to the same electrical safety standards as other assembly occupancies. This could involve requirements for emergency lighting, fire alarm systems, and other safety measures designed to protect occupants in the event of an emergency. It's important to note that the proposal specifies large chain hardware stores with a floor area of 10,000 square feet or more. This is likely intended to focus the amendment on larger stores that are more likely to have a high occupancy load. The amendment also clarifies that supermarkets and hardware stores would not be required to be classified as assembly occupancies for all purposes. This means that they would not necessarily be subject to all of the requirements that apply to other types of assembly occupancies, such as those related to egress lighting or emergency lighting. However, they would be subject to the general safety requirements of Article 518, such as those related to smoke and fire alarms, sprinkler systems, and fire-resistant construction. In summary, the proposed amendment is a reasonable and necessary clarification of the code that would help to ensure the safety of occupants in supermarkets and large hardware stores. It is consistent with the intent of the code, which is to protect the safety of people in buildings where large numbers of people gather. The specific requirements of Article 518 cover a range of electrical safety aspects. Firstly, emergency systems are needed. Article 700 addresses emergency systems, requiring them to supply power to essential loads during a power outage. This includes emergency lighting, fire alarm systems, and other critical equipment. Secondly, wiring methods are outlined. Article 300 specifies general requirements for wiring methods, including the type of wiring allowed in different occupancies. In assembly occupancies, wiring methods must be selected to minimize the risk of fire and electrical shock. Thirdly, grounding and bonding are discussed. Article 250 covers grounding and bonding requirements, which are essential for minimizing the risk of electrical shock and providing a path for fault current to return to the source. Fourthly, overcurrent protection is specified. Article 240 addresses overcurrent protection, requiring circuit breakers and fuses to be properly sized and installed to protect electrical circuits from overload and short circuits. Fifthly, fire alarm systems are important. Article 760 covers fire alarm systems, requiring them to be designed and installed to provide early warning of a fire. Sixthly, communication systems are a must. Article 800 addresses communication systems, which may include telephone, data, and audio systems. These systems must be installed to minimize the risk of interference and electrical shock. Seventhly, lighting requirements are specified. Article 410 covers lighting requirements, including the type of lighting allowed in different occupancies. In assembly occupancies, lighting must be designed to provide adequate illumination for safe egress. Eighthly, electrical equipment must be safe. Article 110 covers general requirements for electrical equipment, including the need for equipment to be listed and labeled for its intended use. Ninthly, inspection and testing is necessary. Article 90 covers inspection and testing requirements, which are essential for ensuring that electrical installations are in good working order. Tenthly, arc fault circuit interrupters should be used. Article 210.12 requires arc fault circuit interrupter protection in dwelling units, but it is not generally required in assembly occupancies. However, it may be required in some areas such as sleeping rooms. The goal is to ensure the well-being of occupants while minimizing the burden on businesses.